This is Ballroom State of Mind, Episode 5, The Horses in Your Head. Hi, and welcome to the Ballroom State of Mind podcast. My name is Amber Hayter, and I am your host. I'm a life coach and an amateur ballroom dancer. And this podcast is where I teach you how to think about life and think about your dancing so that you can win more at both. Let's do it. I wanted to take a little bit of a departure today. This episode is not going to be about dance specifically. It's a podcast episode that I recorded for another purpose, but I thought it still applies and I thought you would still find it useful. So in dancing and in ballroom, when I work with the ballroom clients, literally what we're doing ultimately is learning how to manage your mind, learning how to manage your emotions and maintain the focus in the relevant areas that apply to your dancing. And so this episode totally applies. It's just not talking about dancing, but I think you'll see how it applies and I think it will be helpful for you. So enjoy this one and enjoy the departure for this week. Hi, my name is Amber Hayter and I'm a life coach. And what the heck is a life coach? Not everybody knows what that is. And that's actually for good reason, because life coaches can be just about anything. It's an unregulated industry. There's some schools and programs where you can get some training, but anyone can go out and identify them as a life coach. And so it can really mean a lot of different things. So I want to introduce you today to the way that I do life coaching, what it means to me a little bit. Not extensively, but I just want to introduce you to what I do as a life coach, like at its core. And so you can make a determination if this is something that could benefit you. And the answer is that it can. But I want to introduce you to how I do that. So at the end of the day, at the core of it, what I do as a life coach is I teach people, train them, coach them on how to manage their minds and how to emotionally regulate themselves. So that's it. Managing your mind, managing your emotions. If you can do that, you can solve any problem in your life and you can reach any goal that you want. You can handle your mind, you can handle your emotions. That's all you need. Okay. So how do I do that? Let me try to explain this with a little bit of analogy. I was reading a book recently. It's called The Practicing Mind by Thomas M. Sterner. You don't need to necessarily go look up the book, though. It is a good book. It's very short. If you like short self-help books, this one's for you. It's in reference to practicing, but it introduces an analogy that I really liked, that I thought was really useful in describing mind management and emotional regulation in the ways that I do it. And so I want to share it with you. I'm going to read a little excerpt from this book. It's super short. And then I'm going to talk you through how this applies to life coaching and what I do, how it can help you. So here's the excerpt. So the story is about a chariot rider who steps onto a Roman-style chariot drawn by 4 horses. In this story, the horses represent the mind. The driver, who has an undisciplined mind, steps onto the chariot but has no hold on the reins. The 4 horses run wild all day, exhausting themselves and the driver as they bump along off the chosen path, constantly changing directions. They do not know where they are or where they are going at any given moment. The driver holds onto the railings and is just as helpless as the horses as they all watch the scenery go by. In contrast, a disciplined driver who has the reins in hand is in control and directs the horses down the focused, chosen path, wherever it might be. The horses now have no will. Their energy is directed by the refined commands of the disciplined driver. The ride is smooth, and they all reach their desired destination in the least amount of time, with the least amount of effort and fatigue. Which would you rather be? Okay, so that is the excerpt. Okay, so I like this because just like horses, our minds have personalities, you could say. Our minds have tendencies. Our minds have patterns. When we don't manage those patterns, they can run amok and they can cause lots of problems for us. So many people that I talk to, my clients and in life, they don't really feel in control of themselves. They don't really feel in control of their life. They feel a little bit at the mercy of whatever happens to them and at the mercy of their past patterns, their past conditioning, and also at the mercy of their emotions. They describe situations as if they don't know how they're going to respond in a situation, meaning their emotions just happen to them. They can't control them or manage them in any way, and they feel at the mercy of them. And none of that is true when you learn how to manage yourself, manage your mind, manage your emotions. Okay. So let's call it steps. I'm going to give you like 4 steps, but it's not really steps. It's just 4 areas, I guess, but I'm going to call it steps because that's just easier. So step 1 is for your mind management, your emotional regulation. Step 1 is awareness. You need to get to know your horses. Okay. You need to get to know your patterns, your tendencies, how you respond to things. So when I first start working with my clients, I think this annoys them because they want to know what to do. They want me to tell them what actions to take. We love to know what actions to take because we think if I just get my actions right, then I will feel the way that I want to feel and I will think the way that I want to think, but that's backwards. So they want to go straight to the actions. But I want to get to know their horses. I want to get to know their mind. Because if we can get to know your mind and we get to know your patterns, then we can shape them. And those actions will come so much easier if we address it at the mindset level. Okay, so you need to get to know your horses. So we spend quite a bit of time, especially in the early days, figuring out what are you doing now? What are you thinking now? What are you feeling now? What are your patterns? You study yourself so that you understand better those patterns and how to proceed. So everyone's horses are different. Everyone's minds are different. I have lots of clients, right? And they all have different minds. So when I'm getting to know you as a client, I'm trying to understand your mind. If you came to my session and you just said, tell me what to do, and I just gave you the same thing to do that I give everybody else, it's not necessarily going to be effective for you. I need to get to know your mind. It's like you're on your own planet, and I need to understand the culture of your planet. I need to understand the language of your planet. When you say certain words, what do you mean by those words? So this is the work that we're doing in gaining awareness about what your mind is like. So I have some clients here's some examples. I have some clients who their mind tends to catastrophize. When they're thinking about what's going to happen, their mind goes to catastrophe. It's disaster. The worst thing you can imagine is going to happen. And their mind likes to go straight there. So that is good for us to know. Oh, your mind likes to catastrophize. Good to know. So if this was a horse, this would be a horse who tends to just jump off a cliff, right? It gets so freaked out that it goes bolting straight for the cliff. Okay. I have another client who has a really strong sense of justice, a strong sense of fairness and unfairness. And this creates a problem for them. There's a lot of unfairness in the world. And so if we're expecting everything to be fair, we're going to have a lot of suffering for ourselves. So a person who has a strong sense of justice and a strong sense of fairness is like a horse who is like a bucking horse, where they're kind of resistant to everything and they're kind of throwing a fit. So I have another client who thinks everything's a big deal. When anything happens to them, their mind makes it a big deal. Oh, this is a big deal. It becomes big in importance, even if it's not really that big in importance. So this might be like a horse who's more afraid, a little more skittish. I have clients who are obstacle focused. When we start to look for solutions, we start to make plans, their brain sees every obstacle. I can't do that. I can't do that because of blah, blah, blah. And then we say, okay, well, what if we approached it this way? And it's like, well, I can't because of blah, blah, blah. So their brain is obstacle focused. So this is like a horse who halts or is resistant, a horse that stops a lot, stops a lot, stops a lot. Another client I have is past focused. Lots of clients are past focused actually, but past focused meaning like they can't do things because of their past, or they look to their past to determine if they can do something or not. You'll know you're here when you say things like, well, I've never done it before, so I don't think I can do that. Or I can't do that because of how I was raised, or the reason that's hard for me is because of how I grew up. So there's a past focus that's limiting you. So in this case, this is like a horse who's just anxious about new things. My dog is this way. My dog is anxious about new things. She doesn't really like new environments. She doesn't really like to try new things. She's a little more anxious. She's a little more hesitant. It's super good for you to know the tendencies of your brain. Okay. So step 2 is, now that you know kind of where you stand and where you are right now, what you're like right now, we want to define, where do we want to get to? And it's surprising how hard this is for my clients to articulate. And I think this is because we spend a lot of time in our life talking about where we are, what we don't have, what we're not getting, what we've done before. And we understand very well what is. And we know we want something different, but we don't spend a lot of time actually defining what we want. And with these horses in our mind, we want to know, what is the desired behavior that we want from them? What is the desired behavior that we want from our brain, so to speak? What kind of a brain do we want to have? What kind of a personality do we want to have? What kind of tendencies do we want to train into our brain? So you have to have an idea of where you want to get to. What do you want your horses to do differently? So if your brain catastrophizes, maybe you want to move towards more optimism. Okay, so we want to know where we're getting to, because that's how we're going to determine a path there. And I'll speak more to this in a minute, but for now, let's just figure out where we want to go for some of these mind types. Okay, so if you catastrophize, maybe you want to have a little more optimism. Okay, if your brain has a strong sense of justice, maybe we want to get to a place where we can let go of more of that unfairness that we can't do anything about. And we want to have more peace rather than railing against all the unfairness. Okay. For a brain who thinks everything is a big deal, we want to work towards more calm. We want to work towards more peace. If you have an obstacle-focused brain, then we want to train our brain to see more solutions and not be halted so much by obstacles. If you have a past-focused brain, a past limiting type mindset, then maybe we want to work towards seeing more possibility and believing something's possible, no matter what our past is. Step 2 is, what is your desired behavior? We got to know what that is. We got to define it. In my clients, I'll say, what kind of a person do you want to be? How do you want to show up in that particular situation? And again, it's hard for them to articulate because they haven't really thought about it. They're like, I don't know. I'm going to see who I'm going to be when I get there. And that's not always a recipe for the most functional behavior, right? Like, let's wait until we get into the presence of our family on a holiday to see how we're going to behave and how we're going to think and how we're going to react emotionally. Like, that could be a mess. That could be a disaster. So we want to think ahead of time and know where we want to go. When we've got a chariot, we've got horses, we want to go somewhere, we want to know the path. We want to know the destination, and we want to know the direction that we're going and how we're going to get there. Now, step 3, now that we know where we are, we know what we're dealing with, we know what our personality is with our mind, we know what we want to do with it, where we want to take it. Now we got to prescribe the path. We got to choose the way that we get there. Now, your horses are trainable, okay? No matter what's happened in your past, no matter what conditioning you've experienced, no matter how hard you think it's going to be, your brain is trainable. Your emotions are regulatable, okay? You do not have to be at the mercy of your emotions whenever they come up. You can manage and control a lot of this, okay? Knowing the personality of your horses means that you can shape them. So what is the path there? Now, if you have a catastrophizing mind and you want to work towards optimism, it's probably not going to happen overnight. You probably cannot flip a switch and automatically go to optimism, but we know where we want to get to. And just like any other animal, we can shape their behavior. This reminds me of when I was training my dog. Okay. And she was very quiet. This was her personality. She was very quiet. She never barked. She never whined. So when she was a puppy, when we first had her, she didn't really indicate that she needed to go to the bathroom because she was so quiet. And so I was like, oh man, how am I going to work with this? I thought she would like whine when she needed to go potty, but she doesn't. So now what? But she's very smart and she's very food motivated. So I got a little clicker and I got some really good treats and I started click training her to create a desired behavior in her that I wanted. So I decided I was going to hang bells by my back door and I was going to teach her how to ring the bell. It's not like one day I said, okay, here, you ring these bells now. And she just did it. No, I had to work with her. I had to train her. So first I'd like laid the bells on the ground and I had my clicker and I loaded the clicker, which means like you associate the clicker with a bunch of treats. I click it a bunch of times, I give her a bunch of treats. And so now the clicker's loaded. So then anytime she got near the bells, I would click and treat her. So then it was showing her, oh, when I get close to these bells, I get a treat. And then I would kind of like push the bells towards her nose. And so when they would ring, then I would click and treat her. So now I'm training her, oh, when this bell makes a noise, you get a treat. So then she started pushing her nose towards the bell to make it ring, and I'd click and treat her. Okay. So the next thing I did is I hung the bell up. I hung the bell up on the wall. And similarly, she would ring it with her nose. I would click and treat her. So now I had to associate the bell with going outside. So then every time she'd ring it, I'd open the door, throw the treat outside, and she'd go get the treat. So I did this a bunch of times so that she was associating this bell means outside. This was how I progressed until she figured out, oh, when I ring this bell, it opens the door and I can go outside. So then I'd follow her outside and I'd say, go potty, go potty. So then when she'd go potty, I'd click, treat her, click, treat her, click, treat her. So it wasn't like one day she didn't ring the bell and the next day she did. Although she learned that process in about 15 minutes. No kidding. She's brilliant. So she figured it out pretty quick, but it took training. It took steps. And the same thing can be true of your mind. A lot of times where we want to get to with our mind and our emotional regulation seems really far away, but we are just going to start moving our way there. If I have an obstacle focused mind and I want to move towards a more solution oriented mind, then I know as soon as something comes up, my brain's going to offer me an obstacle. So first I got to notice, oh, this is my mind showing me obstacles all the time. And even though these obstacles feel true and they feel real to me, can I choose a new behavior? Like, well, I think I can find a solution. Like we have to start thinking a different way. What if there is a solution? What if I can get around that obstacle? So I have to start introducing new thoughts, introducing new patterns and trying them on. How will you handle your brain when it presents an old pattern and we want to create a new pattern? What are we going to do? And this is what I do with my clients. This is the work that I do with them, is helping them figure out what is the way that we need to think? What is the way that we want to feel? How do we start shaping that in ourselves? So if I know that I'm going to go to a family gathering where my brother-in-law likes to talk about politics, and normally when I go there, I get really triggered by him, I get really frustrated, and then I get angry, and then I confront him and we end up in a fight. That's my normal pattern, right? This is like a horse that's like, okay, I know that when I go around this bend and we're going at kind of a fast speed, that this horse likes to continue in this other direction and head straight for this pond because it wants a drink. So I can prepare myself. How can I head this off before I get in this chariot, right? So if I'm in this chariot and I've got these horses and I know this one horse is going to take off as soon as I come around this bend, what can I do differently? So I'm like, let me try with this particular horse. I'm going to stop. I'm going to slow down and stop before I reach that bend. This is going to slow the horse's momentum. Let's try that. Let's try that on. So now I'm going to try it, right? So I'm predicting that if I stop before the bend and that the horse doesn't have as much momentum, that I will better be able to control this horse and keep it on the path that I want it to stay on. So I can do the same thing with a family gathering. Instead of doing the same thing I've been doing, let me handle this differently. Let me just try it. So before I go to this gathering, I'm going to decide, how am I going to show up? What do I want to think? I know he's going to be there. I know he's going to bring up politics. This is not a surprise. This is not new. So how do I want to respond? Well, maybe when he starts talking politics, I'm just going to excuse myself for a minute. I'm going to go run an errand. I'm going to go take myself to Walmart and buy something. I'm going to go get a drink at the coffee shop. I'm going to go walk around the block just to get myself in a more settled, peaceful place. Now, when he's talking politics and I'm back in the room, what do I want to think about it? And I can choose some thoughts to intentionally think, some mantras to intentionally think. Like, just because he likes to talk about politics doesn't mean I have to talk about politics. Just because he thinks that doesn't mean he's wrong, actually. It's just different than what I think. Is it okay for him to think differently than me? And I'll tell you what your brain's going to do. Your brain's going to do what it has always done. And it's going to be like, no, he shouldn't believe that. He shouldn't be thinking that. He shouldn't be having this conversation. And your brain's going to want to go back to an old pattern. So what are you going to do when that old pattern comes up? When that horse starts to take off towards the pond, what are we going to do? We got to choose to do this a different way. We got to choose to think differently. We got to learn how to soothe ourselves in these situations that tend to trigger us. That's the work I do with my clients. Now, I want to add a little caveat here. When you're creating these new patterns, recognize that you want to be guiding and training these horses, not controlling or being harsh or punishing your horses for their tendencies. Okay. Same thing is true with your mind. We're managing your mind. We're guiding your mind. We're training your mind. It's not helpful here to be harsh or controlling or punishing with yourself. We're training. Just like we're training a horse or training a dog, we're not going to judge them harshly for being a dog or for being a horse. And the same is true of your mind. Your mind has tendencies and patterns. It's fine. We're working with it. Okay. So try to maintain that attitude as you're creating these new patterns. Now, step 4, I would say, is that you repeat again and again and again. So many times my clients will say, I'm trying to find a new way to think about this. And I tried this and I tried that, but it didn't work. And that's like me saying, I tried to get my dog to ring the bell, but it didn't work. We have to do this again and again and again. Okay. This is how you train something. This is how you train an animal. This is how you train you, is you have to repeat. You have to be willing to repeat the new pattern as many times as you've repeated the old pattern. Your old patterns are easy and automatic and come so readily because you've done them so many times. Your new patterns are going to require repetition too. You're going to have to do more than just try it once or twice. You're going to have to keep trying it. You're going to have to keep practicing it. You're going to take those reins and guide those horses again and again. To do that, you need to be in situations where you can train it, which means we don't want to avoid the situations that trigger us all the time. And these are lowercase t's, lowercase triggers. Okay. I'm not talking about traumas here. I'm talking about just those little everyday things that kind of set us off, that kind of upset us, that kind of bother us, kind of annoy us, frustrate us, make us angry. We need to be in those situations and let those feelings come up so that we can train a new pattern. So we don't want to avoid those situations. We want to welcome them. It's our opportunity for practice. When I see myself get emotionally riled up, I'm like, oh, good. This is interesting. Like now things are getting good. Now I know what I can work on next. Like that's not a bad thing. That's showing me what I need to work on. And just like training horses or training dogs, at first it is harder. When I first take those reins and I'm first trying to guide those horses, I have to do more work. It's going to feel like more work. It's going to feel like it's harder. That's normal. That's to be expected because these horses have not been trained yet. They haven't learned from me yet. So it's going to take time for this to get easier. But as we get better at it, those horses know what to expect. They know what we're doing now. We get better at training them. We get better at knowing what works and what doesn't work for us. Then that ride gets smoother and smoother with less and less correction and less pulling on the reins. And then we can get to a point where we're keeping ourselves on the path. We're keeping ourselves directed. We're going the way that we want to go. And when we need to make a correction, it's just a little one. It's just a little pull of the reins one way or the other, or just a little tug to slow down. But in the beginning, it doesn't feel like that. And that's normal and expected. Okay, so those are the 4 main areas. The last words I want to add is that as you do this work, as I work with my clients and more time goes on and more practice happens, less and less things trigger you. Less and less things bother you. Less and less things annoy you. Things that used to really make you angry don't anymore because you're learning how to manage yourself and manage your emotions. Things that you used to hold on to, grudges or whatnot that you used to hold on to for weeks, months, years, you hold on to so much less, maybe hours. And then you can get to a point where you let things go immediately. It's really important as you go through this process that you don't judge yourself and don't judge your brain. Just like I mentioned earlier, horses will always be horses and your brain will always be a human brain. You are working with it. You are learning how to manage it, but it is always going to be a human brain. And what I mean is there's always going to be something that comes up, those tendencies, those patterns They're going to return from time to time, just in a different situation. My clients think that this means they've backslid. It means that they haven't learned anything and that they're never going to get it, but none of that is true. It just means that we now see where our healing needs to happen next. We now see where the next work is that we need to do, because you still have a human brain and it's still going to do things that cause problems for you, but it's fine because we know how to handle it. We know how to manage it. We know how to do that work. My dog is so good in the kitchen. Like, I trained her for her kitchen behavior. She's very polite. She does not beg. If I tell her to get back, she gets back. She does not eat food that's sitting on the table. She does not eat food that's sitting on the counter. Our pantry door is open all the time. She never goes near it because I trained it out of her. But there has been once or twice when we've come home and my husband said, I had a little block of cheese that I left on the counter. It's gone. And we know that she probably ate it. And are we mad? Not really, because she's still a dog. And at the end of the day, she's an animal and she has an animal brain. And it's really hard for her to control herself all the time, especially when nobody's home and there's a block of cheese sitting on the counter and she can smell it and her instincts are going to kick in. And the same is true for you. Employ that same non-judgment, that same non-criticism. Just learn from it. Learn from the situations that you're in. Learn from the things that trigger you so that you know what work you need to do next, and then get to work on doing it. I do this work with my clients every week, week in and week out. I meet with my clients every week. We work on all the things that come up. We work on all the problems that come up, all the goals that come up that they want to work towards. And we learn how to manage our minds and manage our emotions. And I want to do that for you. So if you don't have a coach, you need to go to my website, amberhader.com, and you need to look me up or find me on Instagram, Amber_H8R, message me, Facebook, all the socials, whatever. Contact me and let's get a consult. Let's get a consult going. You tell me what you want to work through and I'm going to tell you how we can do it. We'll make a plan. We'll make that plan and then we'll get started. So thanks for being here today. We'll talk to you again next time. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you know any other ballroom dancers who you think might benefit from this podcast, be sure to pass it on. For more information on how to connect with me, be sure to check the show notes for my contact information or go to amberhader.com and contact me that way. We'll see you next time.